All right, good morning, everybody. We still have some folks coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started with our presentation today. So I want to thank everybody. Welcome back to the second edition of EANS Coffee Break. Thank you for everyone participating. There will be a short 3-question survey after we conclude. So we appreciate your thoughts on how we can make our conversations even more impactful for your schools. So my name is Matt Marsiglia, and I am your host for Coffee Break. I am the EANS Program Manager for ClassWallet. EANS, as most of you already know, is the emergency assistance for non-public schools, which provided $5.75 billion of funding for schools all across America. We distribute payments for approximately 20% of the country. And today we have 2 special guests from the state of Florida. Florida's Deputy Executive Director, Laura Mazyck, and Raymond Cancannon, Principal at St. John the Evangelist in Pensacola, Florida. Laura, who manages the EANS program in addition to many other duties, can you please introduce yourself, and then Raymond, you can follow.
Oh, absolutely. Good morning, everybody. My name is Laura Mazyck. I'm here with the Office of Independent Education and Parental Choice. In addition to these federal programs that we have oversight of, we also have limited oversight over private schools in Florida, our charter schools, virtual education, home education. So anything that's non-traditional public comes out of our office.
Hi, I'm Ray Cancannon, principal of St. John the Evangelist School in Pensacola. My superintendent asked me to become very familiar with EANS funding when it first came out, so I just immersed myself in all of the information coming out from the DOE and elsewhere. And so I enjoy working with other principals around the state, or even in my home state of Rhode Island, who call me and just looking for suggestions. So thanks for having me, Matt.
Yep, thanks, Ray. And real quick, if you do have any questions, please click on the Q&A bomb at the bottom of your screen. If you're having any bandwidth issues, please close all your applications. For any audio issues, you can also join by phone. We'll be answering questions for the last 15 minutes of this session. So again, thank you guys for introducing yourselves. Let's go ahead and get started. So Florida, being one of the largest states in the country that received the funding, you guys received, Laura, $432 million distributed to over 500 schools for EANS 1, and then you distributed another 500 schools for EANS 2. Thus far, you've already completed over $150 million total for both programs, and you've completed more than 62% of all the grant volume for EANS 1. So with that being said, Laura, you got a lot of experience with EANS. Raymond, you have a lot of experience as well. So let's just jump right into the questions. Even though funds are expiring in a year for EANS 1 and 2 years for EANS 2, we are seeing a lot of urgency with the funds being spent. Schools seem to be rushing a little bit to have their orders submitted with only a quote. And sometimes the quote lacks the information necessary to approve the orders. And there's maybe a lack of justification or narrative on how the school is using the funds. As an example, sometimes a school may have over $1 million and then they submit an order for $300,000. And the justification is we need to social distance our students. From your perspective, Laura, and your lens, can we go in depth to maybe an approved transaction looks like from an EANS administrator's lens?
Absolutely, and thanks for that preface. We are seeing that folks are getting anxious about the approval process, and I completely understand. But looking at it from our perspective, so the first thing that we're going to look at is we're going to look for a justification for the expenditures. Are the expenditures being used to mitigate student learning loss? Are you redeveloping instruction? We would look for something that ties that particular goods or services that you're requesting to a particular group of students. So we may ask you, what grade levels this is going to affect. So we're really looking for something in the way of even a short narrative explanation of why you want to use the funds. And particularly for a lot of folks are using monies en masse. And so you would expect that we would expect a little bit more of a narrative and an explanation. We're also seeing frequently on requests for licenses and subscriptions that they're missing the start and end date. As you guys know, it can't extend past the shelf life of these programs. So we're looking for something that includes the month, day, and the year that these things begin and when they end. And then a couple of other suggestions that we're seeing is make sure that all your invoices and your quotes are clear so that we know exactly what items are being purchased under this program. For instance, for support services, make sure that you include a copy of the signed agreement between the school and the vendor that outlines the services that'll be rendered. And lastly, if you are submitting for reimbursement, make sure that you include a copy of the proof of payment. So a lot of things, these things seem small, but when we have to request more information, that does increase the time on the approval process.
Thank you, Laura. And Raymond, how, from your perspective as a principal actually submitting orders to our platform, what type of justification are you adding in the comments to help facilitate for the admin to understand your need?
So I will admit, I've submitted a lot of orders, and I'll admit sometimes I've been a little lazier on some and they were rejected. And that is probably because running around as a principal, we're also busy. We try to shoot this off in the middle of the day, but I resubmitted it and it was approved. And if I just wish I had taken 5 minutes to take time and think about this. I substitute classical composition during the day a lot. And one of the things we teach the kids here in middle school is reduction. So working with other principals, I've seen full essays on what they're submitting with a bunch of superfluous information. So what I'd recommend and what I've done is just taking what we need to say and reducing it to the key points. And it doesn't have to be beautifully written as long as it hits what Laura was talking about. So I'd say something like, we're using this virtual instructional program for grades 6 through 8 to increase student learning score, student test scores and grasp of mathematics to address COVID-related learning loss as evidenced by Terra Nova and MAP scores. Something like that has typically been long enough to be approved, but also not just, you know, keeping the DOE guessing what we're even going to use this for. So another big thing is submitting the signed contracts, as Laura said. Once in a while, if you download those contracts from a vendor and try to upload them, a common issue is it'll say file type too large. So I'll go to my scanner, scan them in, and then submit those, and it's no problem. Somehow it works that way. So I just say reduce it to the key facts, but also provide all of those.
Thank you, team. All right, let's shift gears a little bit from submitting orders to the quality of orders you're receiving. Since we're no longer in a state of emergency like we were a year ago, I know when EANS first started, you know, June, May last year, opening safely was number one priority. Being able to learn remotely, providing kids computers so if they're sick, they can stay home and still learn. Having kids have a safe and sanitized environment was very important. But now that we're a year into the program, how do you guys want to see the funds being used? I think in our last coffee break, we talked about very generalized categories. So Raymond, why don't you go into a little deep dive on some of the examples of how the funds have specifically helped your school? And then if you don't mind, I can share some of your test scores too when it's relevant.
Okay, sure. So at the beginning I avoided reimbursements altogether because they're a little more cumbersome, and I knew we were going to use all of this money to provide learning services here anyway. So I focused more on just direct payments, which has been a lot easier. So instead of getting reimbursed for hand sanitizer, we just shifted to all instructional support from very early on after doing some furniture things for redesigning our classrooms. So we've done things like partner with vendors to provide a virtual instructor, because part of the COVID society is the big teacher shortage. So especially finding a 1 day a week gifted teacher for middle school. So I worked with a contractor that Zooms in now as a teacher and developed a whole gifted program for our students, and they love it. And one thing I think we might overlook is that the very high level kids have also had some learning loss as a result of all this. So that's been really good. Math programs, with Ray Das, just for test prep, but also basic math skills remediation has been really successful. And then redeveloping some instruction. You can pay your teachers to do some summer work or some work in their off time to do curriculum maps and really address those things that we don't often have too much time for during our contracted hours. And then finally, the vast majority of our funding has been used for hiring additional support staff. It can't be used to hire your fourth grade teacher, for example, but what I've done is hired a lot of resource teachers that will be supplementing what the teachers are doing in the classroom, such as ESE teachers in our Morningstar program, so we can have way smaller groups for group work and small classes, math remediation, and then also a lot of interventionists who will do pullouts from non-core classes and work with the kids through the day to address reading lags. And that has really helped with a lot of the reading performance at our school. Now you can see on here, I shared this with Matt, and I'm happy to share it with you. There's one, I just made this looking at, we use Terra Nova at St. John's. So I just made this little chart and I've been looking at it this year. And this is from 21-22. So last year, you can kind of see what our scores did as far as cohort growth, which is what I look at. So last year's third graders compared to the year before. So we're looking at the same kids if you look at the cohort growth. And we really focused a lot of these programs on grades 5 and up, especially with the virtual instructors. And you can see the gains they had. So a 1 is, baseline. They've had 1 year of growth in 1 year. And I did full disclosure, grade 4 was not a strong year for us last year. And that had to do with a variety of things, not necessarily related to this. But again, I look at this and okay, so we've hired another support personnel with EANS funds to really work on those kids who are currently in grade 4 or now grade 5 to say, okay, these kids had some severe learning loss. What can we use to help them out? And that's mostly going to be with intervention and providing more resources for curriculum. I mean, you can even get some textbooks for them that will address these key issues like mathematics in grade 4. So we did that this year.
Thank you, Raymond. And those are all great examples. And Laura, from a MEM perspective, what are your goals and objectives for the long-term spending as opposed to earlier in the program when it was just focused on reopening?
Right. Well, it's interesting that today the National Center for Education Statistics just came out with their yearly report on the test scores of 9-year-olds, specifically in math and reading. And it appears that nationwide our kids dropped 5 points in ELA, English Language Arts, and 7 points in math, which was the largest drop apparently in 20 years. Now, of course, we're talking about public school students here, but our private school students aren't immune to this kind of data either. So I think that what I would like to see is that, first of all, our goal here is to get these monies spent down. I think everybody wants that. We have seen an urgency in folks wanting to spend this money down because we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. The last date to submit for payment under this program will be June 30 of 2023. So with that urgency, what I would like to see as an administrator is more folks spending these dollars on mitigating student learning loss. That's just the bottom line. And we've talked about that we're on the other side of the pandemic. The CDC requests are starting to wane, and we are seeing more redeveloping instruction. So I think that that's the impetus behind this program, and I would like to see in this next year more of a focus by our schools on that.
Thank you, Laura. And we see a lot of requests for furniture, which is great for social distancing and to create calming spaces for kids and areas for overwhelm kids to feel better. But to your point, with those scores coming out being, 5% less than in a 20-year low, let's talk about how we can get kids caught up with their education. I know Megan mentioned last week or during our last coffee break that there were kids that were behind in education before the pandemic started.
Yes.
And then Ray, you mentioned today that even the kids that are not necessarily behind, they've lost a little bit with the pandemic. So what specific instances are you seeing schools do to support this learning environment? And happy to share a couple of examples of invoices that you speak about on PowerPoint, Laura.
Okay, well, a couple or three things that we have seen, and Matt, I'm not sure if you can pull those examples up. For instance, there's a company called PowerUp EDU, and this particular school ordered, it's actually a floor panel that's interactive with the students. So it can, for instance, test the students. It's somewhat of a STEM lab. So that's kind of what we're looking for. We like to see where schools are creating separate labs, particularly in the STEM area. We, again, love to see anything that's redeveloping instruction. Another company called Anonymage. This particular school, this was under redeveloping instruction, but it's a 3D anatomy and physiology simulation lab. So we were very intrigued by this on this end. We love to go out and Google these things and look at them and see what other schools are using this sort of requests. And then another one, so there's Anonymage, is a company called Creative Learning Systems. This was quite a large request. It was over $200K for this particular school. But again, this is an example of what we're seeing in the way of STEM labs. Some other great examples of companies that are that a lot of your schools are using are Legos Education, Lakeshore Learning, Learning Partners for Success. So anyway, that's kind of what we're looking at. We've even seen requests for other STEM items such as a robot and drone kit. We've seen more than one request for that. So that's what we're looking at.
Thank you, Laura. And Raymond, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I'd just like to add that we've also used it for a lot of professional development for pedagogy with different companies, Jam Education, Memoria Press, and Setting Limits all came out to our school, and we were able to use EAN funds to justify why they would come to train our teachers. And it's made such a difference, especially with things like classroom management and instructional design and techniques, because those are kind of the basics that to have retraining for the teachers really will help address learning loss, especially classroom management. I mean, if that's not the groundwork, I mean, not much learning is going to happen. So that alone has really helped.
Very good. And outside of these vendors, many schools think they only have access to certain vendors that are listed in ClassWallet. However, this is not the case in most states. Since these are emergency use funds, as outlined by the U.S. Department of Education, they purposely gave schools the autonomy to use vendors of their choice. And Raymond, you specifically hired a few. We'll let you elaborate on that process. But right now in Florida specifically, we have over 860 vendors in the platform. We have over 2,000 right now in the ClassWallet network for all states that we manage. And we add multiple vendors every single week. Laura, how often and how many vendors are you approving weekly in Florida?
Well, I only went back the past month, just for an example, because we have seen a huge uptick in vendor requests. But on average, we've approved about 50 a week over this past month. So we very seldom decline a vendor unless it's just absolutely appears to be out of scope.
And then Raymond, you specifically hired a few. Can you elaborate on the process and who you hired and how schools can think a little bit outside the box? Because all the examples we use are great, but you may know some company that's local you want to use to support a local business. But how did you work with the process, Raymond?
Sure. I mean, I remember the first week looking around ClassWallet, I thought we had to just search the vendors and see what was there. There were a couple dozen. So now we're up to 2,000, and that's great. And so there's a form, but it's a little mysterious to some people, although it's extremely easy. You just work with a vendor to have them register on that form, and it takes, a couple weeks to a month or two, and they'll be showing up as an approved vendor. So a lot of principals, I think, believe they're stuck with the big publishers who are already on there. Some are very good. Like Fax Management is probably one of the biggest vendors, and we work with them a ton. But then for other stuff like curriculum, we wanted some pretty specific companies that we know would be good for our student population. So, for example, I'd work with our IT company, Blanks Consulting, or let's see, Memoria Press, different book fairs, Good News Book Fair. Say, okay, we'd really want this for our students, and these are the parameters. So just kind of guiding them through, because they don't, some of them last year didn't even know what EANS was. And I said, okay, are you willing to become a vendor? Because it's going to be mutually beneficial. And they were very willing. So you just go through the guidelines, like these are the secular requirements, these are the categories we have to use. What do you have that can fit that? Many of them do have aspects that will fit. And then just kind of guide them through the process of that registration form, put them in contact with the DOE if they have questions. And you can usually get it going pretty soon. And one big question the vendors have is, what is this 2.5% ClassWallet fee? And just kind of coaching a vendor, make sure you add that as a line item if you're going to charge us for that. Otherwise, it won't work. When we submit it, you won't get paid the full amount you're billing us. So I found it very helpful. And even small little companies like setting limits, that's a 2-person company, but we knew we wanted those authors training our teachers. So it took a little while, but it was really worth it in the end.
Yeah, and this is, I'm showing a screen example of the pre-registration form for schools to learn how to add new vendors. Some states require SAM.gov registration, which Florida does. And so that's a process outside of ClassWallet that vendors have to be part of through SAM.gov. Just basically means they're eligible to accept government funding. And then the next thing is to upload a W-9. And then the last step of the process would be to just select the category, because as we know, there's 12 very specific categories EANS addresses, which are these right here. We outlined them during our last coffee break, but they simply select the category they are eligible for. They can select multiple here. And then once they do that, they attach all the documentation, hit submit, and then Laura's team receives a copy of it, and they typically approve the vendors within just a few business days. All right, so moving right along, let's transition a little bit to leftover EANS fundings. One consistent request that we see at ClassWallet, we typically were defunding schools every now and then that they were declined, whether they accepted a PPP loan or whatever reason. Many states have leftover money that must be distributed back to the governor's office. However, most administrators know distributing funds back to the governor's office is frowned upon. And we've seen other states take their leftover money to support schools who maybe didn't receive any funding, or help schools that did not fall within the poverty guidelines as outlined by USDOE. So specifically in Florida, Laura, can you discuss your plan and timing of leftover EANS funds?
Yes. And that's a great question. It is something that we've discussed here. And I can tell everyone who's on this webinar today that it is our desire to use all of the funds directed towards our private schools. It is not our intention to send any money back. So right now, as it stands today, we have about 15 million left in the EANS funding pot. So I'm thinking that we are leaning towards reaching out to our eligible private schools that are currently participating in EANS. And we're working on trying to figure out either a per pupil distribution or based on what our private schools have indicated that their needs are. But we're going to be doing something in the next month that you're going to see, but it is our desire to spend down the unused funds.
Great news. All right, we got a couple minutes left. Before we dive into some questions. Every month, Laura, you hop on a ClassWallet call with other states managed by us for a user group session, and we discuss best practices. One thing that we always chat about are items that are 100% not allowed for EANS fundings, but your team receives a lot of requests for these. So for the sake of clarity, what are a few items that you can without a doubt confirm they will not be approved?
Well, the purchase of vehicles is prohibited. The replacement of windows. I think most of you realize that as far as window replacement, so we can only cover the labor cost. Lease agreements, we do continue to have some issues with lease agreements. So we need to see clearly on those agreements that, first of all, that they're executed by both parties and they are submitted not for your school's main campus, but for the space that your school has had to utilize for social distancing. Perhaps your school has grown exponentially because folks, are coming back from home education after 2 years. So that, there are some deal breakers. Again, anything that is considered a capital improvement, meaning that it's an upgrade to your school, but it's a permanent upgrade. So we're doing a lot of outdoor screenings, for instance, but they can't be such a fix to the school that it would be impossible to remove them.
Thank you, Laura. And we got another minute or so left before we dive into the questions. So one thing I will show real quick is just a little quick example of how you can actually add documents to your orders. So I'm going to share my screen. And go to the manage orders. And this is what a typical manage order section looks like in ClassWallet. If you have a ClassWallet account, you can access this by going to the menu in the top left, clicking manage orders. And any order that's still pending that you want to go ahead and add documents to, you click in it, go to manage receipts. And then once you're in manage receipts, you can simply upload more documentation, or you can delete documentation you've already uploaded. This is just an easy way if you do have some more language you want to add. We spoke earlier in the presentation about what does a good language look like for justification of your purchase. So if you do want to add some more language in here to help the admins understand your need, we highly recommend you do that by going into ClassWallet and to manage orders and just adding your documentation there. And then one other thing I'll go ahead and share while I have everybody here. I saw a question already about how to approve a vendor. It's very simple, the process outlined. I really just Googled become an EANS vendor ClassWallet. That's what I Googled. First page is us. This is our website. If you click into it, vendor information, it goes right to our website. And this talks about the EANS program and how to become an approved vendor. If you scroll down to the bottom in the FAQs, how to become an approved vendor for the non-public schools to pay me using EANS funds. We have links here to all the states we manage. So really, all the vendor needs to do is go to this website, find out the link here, click it, and fill out the form. From our perspective at ClassWallet, we do not approve any vendors. We do not approve any orders. It's all done by Laura's team or your specific state administrator. So the vendor process is, we help facilitate as a third party, a liaison to help manage the process, but the process is done by the state. So you have to fill out this form, wait on the state for approval. And once they are approved, the vendor will have to be required to create a ClassWallet account, fill out a W-9, and then link their bank account. All of our payments are done through ACH wire transfers. So the vendor does not link their bank account, we cannot add them to the school list. So there is typically a 3 or 4 day lag time between approval and being on our platform as we wait for the vendor to upload that documents. So that's that answers your question on how to actually become a vendor. Let's go ahead and dive into some questions now. I got 10:32. We'll spend the next 15 or so minutes answering questions. And then Laura, Raymond, if you see any questions in here that you want to just jump in, feel free to. I'll start reading a few that I think that we could just go ahead and answer. Let's see. Please clarify the deadline for ARP EANS 2 funds. Every state has a unique deadline depending on when they want your last order to be submitted, but the official registration is September 30th, 2024, with EANS 1 being September 30th, 2023. Somebody asked, can the funds be used to pay a lease to expand to another campus if more space is needed?
Yes, Yes, and we're seeing quite a few of those. Just so that the space that you're leasing is approved as a private school, then yes. Meaning it has inspections.
Well, just ask, are you any closer to getting Apple on the platform? And we actually are, Apple is working with Florida, Georgia, and Michigan to become approved vendor. So that should be going live in the next 30 days as we work through our contractual details with Apple. But yes, Apple should be expected on the platform for those 3 states in the future.
Right. I heard that rumor too, that Apple's coming. That's going to be a big deal for a lot of schools.
Yeah.
Florida.
Yeah, we're excited to get them on board. Let's see. Can the funds be used? Wait, I think I just answered that one. Our school's grown and we've been leasing space at our next door civic center for our STEM lab. We lease this space due to growth required for the extra space, especially at the height of COVID. Would this type of expense be approved? We need to do a reimbursement for the entire year lease or monthly? I think that's a good question because, Laura, we do see that often. Should you do that monthly or should it be an entire year from your perspective?
We are typically doing that monthly, but I think that we could do it for the entire year.
As long as the expiration is not past the
Correct.
deadline of EANS.
Now, employees, though, or resource teachers and et cetera, are invoiced monthly in my experience.
Correct.
Mhm.
And Matt, if you don't mind, can I go back up to a previous question?
Yeah, go ahead. Chime
It's
in.
kind of nagging at me, and I wish that I had said this earlier. So in my on my soapbox with talking about redeveloping instruction and mitigating student learning loss, I don't want to exclude the social emotional aspect of this. So as most of us know, the past 2.5 years have been hard on our students. So I would like for that to be in the thought process for some of our schools that, most of you deal with very vulnerable populations. So just keep in mind that the social emotional.
Right. We were able to benefit from that a little bit. One of the best things we found for addressing that issue is our theater program here, which is a class that we run during the day. And just I've heard of a study, I haven't seen it very recently, about just the detriments to communication among kids in about 3rd to 6th grade right now after coronavirus. And I found theater really boosting their confidence and speaking skills and then their general performance in class.
It's a great idea, Ray.
All right, let's see. We have laptops, smart boards, and such, but our internet crashes from too much need. Can funds be used to solidify internet in the school? We would like to create a Wi-Fi network that covers our entire campus.
The answer is yes. We have covered that.
All right, and Ray, Laura, if you see any questions you want to answer, feel free to just jump in as I'm reading some of these.
Can we have an updated list of vendors because there are so many new ones since EANS started? Well, if you just go to vendors, there's a alphabetized list and you can just kind of search around. Sometimes the vendors will match exactly what you want, such as technology, if you just search technology, but some of the tech companies don't have technology in their name. So it might just take the long process of looking through all 2,000 in Florida, but they are all on there. They're not categorized though, as far as searching.
Yeah, we're working on updating our platform to help with the categorization. But today, if you just go into ClassWallet and click Pay Vendor, you will see an entire list of all the approved vendors that are officially able to do business. Like again, some vendors may be approved, but they haven't finished setting up their ClassWallet accounts. They're not being shown yet. And you can always email us, EANS@classwallet.com, to find out your vendor status, and we can let you know where they're at in the process. Laura just mentioned reimbursement. My understanding is EANS 2 approved schools are not allowed to seek reimbursements. That's true. Our school paid $150,000 in subscription devices from March 20 to May 2021 due to social distancing. Could I submit these receipts, or was Laura referring to EANS 1 schools only?
No, that's for both.
Okay, I see a question on I see a couple question on service fees. So some companies will absorb that service fee, but most will pass it on to the school. And yes, that can be covered through EANS funds. But as I was saying, if they want to do that, just make sure when they send you the invoice for services that they line item that as 2.5% ClassWallet fee. And then you can add that into your, like, the school doesn't have to pay that directly. You can include that in your EANS funding.
And just to clarify, that is Florida specific. You know, a lot of
Okay.
states do allow that. Not every state does. And just to clarify our fee, we are an accounts payable solution similar to MasterCard or Visa, and Florida and other states hired us as like a credit card essentially. So we're distributing tens of thousands of payments to vendors, so the state doesn't have to cut all those checks. And that's how we earn our money, is through our, just like MasterCard and Visa does. So just to clarify the fee, and thanks Ray for letting you know, you can, in Florida, you can add that to the invoice. Let's see. Jennifer asked, could Ray send a cheat sheet for key verbiage that has worked? I know in the beginning of the process, Marcy Iyer shared something similar, but that information has changed a lot.
Hi, Marcy. If you want a cheat sheet, I don't recommend cheating at all here at St. John's, but if you'd like, you're welcome to email me, and I'd be happy to work with anybody. St. John's School, Pensacola.com. So especially if there's something specific. I was a grammar and composition teacher before all this, so I enjoy that.
So I have a question from Michigan School. They have not released EANS 1, the supplemental funds yet. I actually got word this week that those will be coming out in the next 2 weeks, Frank. So please be on the lookout for those extra additional funds that are going to be released. Just like Laura mentioned, other states have leftover funds that they're redistributing. Michigan will be redistributing those in about a couple of weeks. So be on the lookout for that.
Can funds be used to repair playground surfaces for safety? Wow, I would guess not, but Laura would know much better than I.
We have had those requests and we've declined them out of scope.
Yeah, so really I would guess that's because of permanent improvements to school buildings and infrastructure.
You're right, Raymond.
So
Can we use EANS 2 to install a new HVAC system in our school?
I'm not going to say yes or no on that one. I'd like to see.
It's a loaded question.
I'd like to see the quote first.
Yeah, keep in mind,
feel free to send it to me.
It has to be allowable, reasonable, and necessary. So I think reasonable would be maybe the key word for that request. I could see that being, you know, a lot of money. Is it better for the school to pay for something up front and get reimbursed through ClassWallet rather than pay the vendor through ClassWallet because of the fees? Again, the fees are between us and ClassWallet. Has nothing to do with the school. Reimbursement would be if you didn't mind using your own operating budget and then being reimbursed for it. And I know certain categories, depending on the state, reimbursements are not allowed for specific categories as well. Laura, you can probably answer that better for your state.
No, that's absolutely correct. So I think it's up to the individual school, knowing that if you're part of both programs, there are no reimbursements under EANS 2.
I see a question from Anita. And if we submit 3 quotes for a purchase and the purchase is approved, do we get a chance to agree with the vendor chosen before they are paid directly? What I've done when we have a big project and we don't want to commit to a big project without pre-approval, in my experience, I've emailed the Florida Department of Education with the proposal and say, hey, would this be approved? And we kind of have a pre-approval by email. Is that the correct way? Or I would not submit that to ClassWallet yet until I'm ready to go.
No, I agree.
So it's hard. It's very difficult to retrieve that money once it gets sent to the vendor.
I think that's a good question because we do get lots of questions about leasing spaces. If you rent a leasing space, what information will we have to provide for reimbursement that would help you approve it?
Well, I think we sort of discussed that early on, is we would look for, certainly an executed agreement between the school and whoever you're leasing the space from. Another thing that we do look at is to make sure that there's no connectivity or familial relationship between who you're leasing from and your school. And also we would need some sort of narrative again that shows why you are leasing this additional space. Did your school grow? Is it simply because you're creating, a STEM lab, for instance, or social distancing? But we need some sort of narrative.
Okay, I see one that I think a lot of people have is to improve safety and security of students. Can services for mental health training and first aid be covered? Can the install of security cameras be covered campus-wide? Patty Daly.
Well, that's a lot in one question.
Right.
I'd like to see the quote or what you're proposing, but in many instances, some of those things we have covered. For instance, the touch pads where you don't have to actually open the door, I forget what it's called, but anyway, we've covered things like that under CDC, for instance. So if the requester wants to send me a proposal, I'd be more than happy to take a look at it.
And mental health, I mean, we've hired and expanded guidance services through a vendor.
Absolutely.
Other schools have as well, and that's really important. I would imagine you could propose a behaviorist or something as well through a vendor.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I think the mental health goes back to Laura's point about social emotional learning and improving that environment, and mental health services. That would be a big area, in my opinion, that would go well hand in hand with those two learnings.
Absolutely. And, not to belabor this, but, as educators, everyone here knows that if you haven't dealt with the students' hierarchy of needs, then all of the trying to catch up is going to be out the window. So absolutely.
Well, I have 10:45. I want to respect y'all's time. Laura and Ray, do you have a few more minutes to answer questions before we kick off, or do you guys need to get going? Got a couple more
Sure,
questions.
I can stay 5 minutes.
All right, so let's say we've got 2 teachers that I would like to use for overhauling and curriculum and provide Saturday tutoring. Do they need to become a vendor? I'll answer that one. Yes, if states are using ClassWallet to be, they had to be an approved vendor by the state. I think Michigan's the only state that auto approves the vendors. So just please have your teachers fill out the pre-registration form, and then once they are approved, you'll be able to submit direct payments to them for tutoring.
Question, you said most of the vendors absorb the fee by anonymous. Some vendors will absorb the fee. That's a dealio you'll have to make with the vendor when you speak with them.
Yeah.
Most do not absorb the fee. But you can always try.
Many of us do not know how to properly invoice for additional help. That's from Eunice. I would recommend working with the vendors. If you're struggling to get a proper invoice, a lot of these vendors, they've been working tirelessly with EANS schools across the state and country, and they're very familiar with how to properly invoice. And a lot of vendors also can give you specific wording to help understand how it aligns with the COVID-related expense that's outside your normal operating budget. So if you're struggling to get properly invoiced, I would lean on your vendor for help with that.
EANS approval timelines. I know with Florida, it's on the EANS website, and they just updated it about 2 weeks ago. So that should be up to date. And you can check that out to see how long it should take, and let your vendors know if they're kind of putting on hey, when are we getting paid? Just refer them to that. And that's what I do. And then after school clubs for our students to help them with social emotional growth. How could EANS funding help with this? I mean, that could either be a contracted service or a stipend, I believe, to one of your current employees through a contracting company.
Correct.
All right, let's go ahead and wrap it up with a couple last questions here. So I got two questions that are pretty much the same, one from Lena and one from Laurel. Can we have an updated list of vendors, because there are so many new ones since EANS started, and it would be great if we can get EANS vendors listed by category. So with that being said, I will show you the website that we've created at ClassWallet for individual states. It's just a resource guide for your team. And this is every state that we work with. We create these websites, and it talks about the purchasing journey. So you can see here how you can actually, what the steps are 1 through 6, what the approved spending categories are here. These are all the 12 categories approved by the state and by US DOE. And then here's the top vendors that are used for Florida. And you can actually click here and see the full vendor list. So when you click this full vendor list, it'll actually show you, let me stop sharing and share my entire screen. And when I open up that vendor list, it opens up a PDF file, and it actually shows the name. I know it's really tiny right now, but you can go do this on your own time. It's got the category, the name, the service provider, and an email address. You can contact them. We do try to update this at least every 2 months. It's not as, it's just not correlated with our pay vendor platform, so it's a little bit of manual work on our side. But if you do want to see the category, please go to our website, classwallet.com/Florida-EANS, or if you just replace your state, so if you just put in, Michigan, for example, you'll see the Michigan website here. Or if you're with Georgia, type in Georgia, and you get the Georgia website as well. So whatever state you're using, please know this resource is available for you as well. But yeah, I think it's been a great session, Laura and Ray. I really appreciate y'all's time today. Apologies if we couldn't get to all your questions answered. We'll point out not next week, but in 3 weeks, we have a special guest from Lakeshore Learning. She's the chief academic officer for the entire company, and they work for all 50 states. We're excited to have her, as well as the Indiana EANS administrator, Lacey Bolin. So if you register for this webinar, you're automatically registered for the next one as well. And it's going to be on September 22nd. And again, Ray, Laura, appreciate your time today. You guys did great. And thank you for all your dedication to the program. And please, if you can, there's a quick survey at the end, 3 questions. If you can just give us some feedback on how we can make these better for you, we appreciate that.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Matt.
Raymond.
Yep. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Matt.
I love the birds, Matt.
Thanks.